Here at the Black Information Network, we know how important it is for you to start your week off energized, engaged, and enlightened. There are always major stories that break over the weekend, and we feel you should know about the ones we are talking about today. So stay tuned for our weekend recap, featuring the author of the book, Trap History, and executive editor of Atlanta Daily World, Mr. A.R. Shaw. This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. All right, Mr. A.R. Shaw. It's been a long time coming, sir. How was your weekend? Your long weekend?
Very, very interesting weekend, to say the least. You know, of course, there's a lot of breaking news. And then I just got back from the Essence Festival in New Orleans. So trying to catch up on some rest. It's just been ongoing for the last 4 or 5 days.
Well, I tell you what, why don't you share it with us and then we'll let you get off and get rested up. All right. So first thing, I know something that everyone has been talking about leading into this past holiday weekend. The Supreme Court announced its ruling against the use of affirmative action in college admissions. This topic has been trending on all news outlets. So give us some background on this story.
Yeah, definitely. So several days ago, the Supreme Court had several, what some people are calling discriminatory rulings. One of the highlights of the affirmative action ruling, basically putting a ban on affirmative action, saying that colleges can no longer use race-based for admissions. And of course, that sent a ripple throughout the nation as far as what's going to happen next when it comes to college admissions. But there's also been some counteractions to that as well. Of course, there's been a group called the Lawyers for Civil Rights, who they actually filed a lawsuit against Harvard for discrimination and giving preferential treatment to students of legacy students. I wrote an article several days ago that basically broke down what happens when it comes to legacy students. Of course, 43% of legacy students, when we're talking about students who are children of wealthy donors, staff members, and alumni, they get there. 43% of those students happen to be white. And another shocking number is that 75% of those students probably wouldn't have made it into Harvard without that preferential treatment.
Sure.
And so we're going to see what's going to happen next as far as what happens with the legacy student. So of course, there's several layers to this particular story. Another interesting thing is that they didn't implement this same rule for the armed services. Which is very interesting that they didn't use race. Say that the armed services don't have to comply by those same rules and standards. But yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see what happens next in terms of affirmative action. What's going to happen with how schools are going to counteract this in terms of making sure that their campuses stay diverse in different ways. Yeah,
absolutely. The thing about the armed forces is interesting because it's almost like there's a government body suggesting that we are okay to be represented proportionately when it comes time to fight or protect the interest of the country. But when it comes time for us to ascend to higher levels of success, if they feel like it might come at the expense of a white child, then there are no protections there. And it's just interesting what the country prioritizes when it comes to Black and brown people. There are a couple of people that had some really interesting thoughts on this development, and one justice in particular, Clarence Thomas. I know that Stephen Smith had some interesting thoughts, so I want to share a little bit of what he had to say.
Out Catholic, originally intended to be a priest, actually decided not to be that, by the way, because he became frustrated over the church's insufficient attempt to combat racism. Ended up attending Yale Law School via affirmative action. He attended law school. He was an affirmative action student. Gets better. Appointed by Ronald Reagan as chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This man once oversaw the EEOC. The very job he held was to address racial inequality in this country. He made it to the Supreme Court, second Black in the history of the Supreme Court. His predecessor was the great Thurgood Marshall. I could easily go into Clarence Thomas. And I think Dr. Michael Eric Dyson put it best. He said, this is the face of a man who climbed the ladder of affirmative action to his present perch of power, only to help destroy the very ladder on which he ascended.
So that's some interesting thoughts. I saw that viral clip and I wanted to make sure that I shared that. What, in your estimation, has been the general Black people's general consensus with respect to Clarence Thomas's position on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, this is just someone who basically climbed the ladder and burned it, and is really perplexing. I got an opportunity to actually watch his documentary that he has that kind of gives a backstory of how he became who he is. From a personal standpoint, he was picked on a lot when he was at Yale. A lot of the white students picked on him and said that you're only here because of affirmative action. And he internalized that. And it also, and I think it made him hate himself, and it also made him hate everyone who looked like him. It's an unfortunate situation. It seems like there's a lot of deep layers, issues that he's dealing with from a personal standpoint that's impacting the entire nation, because he sits within this powerful position and he has so much, he can impact what happens in the lives of others, but he's still dealing with personal issues that he faced because he was an affirmative action student at Yale. And, it's just a reaction. It's an unfortunate reaction to personal issues.
It's another thing that I think is really interesting is how six geriatric bigots, let's be honest, can strip the rights from nearly 400 million people just because they had a meeting in a room and they decide, or, obviously there's a lot of benefactors and people that have helped them advance, but those people are all kind of a similar mindset, namely billionaires and people that don't live a real American life a la the rest of us. And for us all to be subject to the whims of those people, it doesn't really feel like a democracy, at least in this moment. There's another person who had some real interesting thoughts on it. I want to share his thoughts as well. His name is Qasim Rashid, another video that's gone viral. So let's check it out.
Here's the thing that MAGAs don't seem to understand about affirmative action. It was never about admitting unqualified Black kids. It was always about ensuring that qualified Black kids could actually get a fair shake at admission. MAGAs want us to forget at the levels of systemic racism in universities. I mean, my God, do they realize that HBCUs exist specifically because after graping, enslaving, murdering, lynching, and torturing Black people for 400 years, they wouldn't even allow Black children to read a book. So Black people had to build their own schools. And for those claiming that systemic racism is over, when did those systems of white supremacy stop? Because right now, Black and brown schools get $23 billion less in funding than white schools, despite serving the same number of students. Because even now, 43% of white students at Harvard are there only because of legacy, and 3/4 of them would not have qualified on merit, meaning they took a seat from a more qualified Black, Asian, or white student. And spare me the MAGAs who say we had to repeal affirmative action because it's discriminatory to Asians. No, first of all, Asians also benefited from affirmative action. And moreover, is this the same GOP that near unanimously voted to block a resolution condemning anti-Asian discrimination? The actual unqualified admission you should be upset about are people like Justice Kavanaugh getting to Yale on legacy. The bottom line is this: don't blame Black people for your own mediocrity.
Interesting take on things. And I think that obviously he understood, he probably read your article, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of the data that you were citing a little earlier. So I'm glad to know that there are some people pushing back against this and people trying to get to the truth of it, you being one of them. So, as you mentioned, we're going to continue to watch this story and see how it develops. But for now, we need to know where we stand with respect to our education and the education of our people. And so I appreciate your insight. The author of the book Trap History and executive editor of Atlanta Daily World, Mr. A.R. Shaw, is here with us discussing the weekend's major stories. All right, so another trending story this weekend was the influx of Black people moving away from Twitter and moving to a new social media app called Spill. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that this is almost like the, the thing about as Black people, we always find a way, right?
Uh-huh.
So of course we go back a few months back. Elon Musk he buys Twitter and it's massive layoffs, and within this group of layoffs, of course, Black employees are impacted tremendously. Now, a few of those Black employees, Alfonso Terrell and DeVaris Brown, they decided to come together and create a new app called Spill. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that this app is something. It's more inclusive, and I say that because it's if we look at what happened when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, we saw a rise in hate mm-hmm. speech. We saw a rise in racial slurs. I think once he purchased Twitter, the use of the N-word increased by 500%.
Absolutely.
And so we saw the backlash and the vitriol that was spewed on Twitter once he opened the floodgates and said that there was no lines of what could be said. Mm. So I think Spill serves as a safe space for Black creators, Black people who want to share their voice and their ideas, and just as a platform. As people say, for us, by us. But I think they want to, and I think I want to make sure that we're clarify this, is that it's not just specifically for Black users, but he wants to make sure there's a safe space for Black creatives and Black individuals who want to voice their opinions.
Yeah. I gathered as much before I even knew that we were talking about that. Well, let me start at the beginning. When Elon Musk took over Twitter and he took those restrictions off so people could put the N-word, I do a show called Civic Cypher. My co-host and I, we both deleted our Twitter accounts on air just to let people know that we were serious. We weren't going to stand for that. We don't want to live in a world where that sort of what we call it hate. That sort of hate is free to grow and to become cancerous, right? We don't want to support or involve ourselves in an environment or anything like that does not prioritize equality and equity and inclusivity, et cetera. So we have a good friend named Isaac Hayes III who has a social media site called Fanbase, and we jumped over to Fanbase and have been active on there. And then just this past weekend, we set up accounts for Spill. And so when I was going through the process of saying, and this was before I knew that we were going to have this conversation, but before that, when I was going through the process to set up my Spill account, I understood it to be exactly how you described it. Basically, it's a place where Black people can feel welcome. It's not, it does not exclude anyone, but I believe that it prioritizes kind of that culture that's found in Black Twitter, the language, just the color schemes, just the fun kind of aspect to it. Twitter is a little bit more boring and, government officials, things like that. But the real backbone of Twitter, the humorous, the wheel that is turning in Twitter is Black people, in my estimation, always has been. And so it felt like a soft place to land for people who really are significant contributors to the culture, in particular, Black culture on Twitter, a la Black Twitter. And so I'm really excited to see what happens with both Spill and with Fanbase now that people are kind of realizing that there are alternatives out there. So, I'm going to, keep watching this. I'm sure we all are. And it just makes me really happy. And it makes me happy to know that I was early, because a lot of times I'm a little late, but, I was early on this one. So before I let you go, I definitely want to hear about this gathering over the 4th of July holiday in New Orleans called the Essence Fest. Obviously, you went there. There's a lot of news that is trending from that event, and I would like for you to give our listeners an overview or recap or the highlights or whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, Essence is like the Black family reunion.
Yeah.
So it's like, for all ages, you see grandma, you see grandfathers and young kids, playing around. It's for everybody. And I think, this year was very special because they celebrated Hip Hop 50, and they made sure that Hip Hop 50 was was very pronounced. And you saw, graffiti taggings and the shows. They had several performances, of course, with hip hop legends such as Rakim, Dougie Fresh, Slick Rick, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, the Sugar Hill Gang. Those were like, prominent moments to show the history of hip hop and pretty much how it's impacted us in society today. I'm also got to give a shout out to the Atlanta. They had an Atlanta set with Atlanta hip hop legends such as Ludacris, Jermaine Dupri, T.I.
I love that.
Gucci Mane. So it was something for pretty much everybody, that they can enjoy. But one thing that I want to really point out is Missy Elliott. Missy Elliott, she performed on Saturday night, and she had what some are calling a Super Bowl level type performance, meaning that a lot of people are petitioning for her to be chosen for a Super Bowl, an upcoming Super Bowl. She brought the energy. It was just a fantastic show from beginning to end. So it was a great gathering. Of course, they had a panel discussion for the Black mayors from New York, Atlanta, New Orleans, Cleveland. So that was a great panel to see how each mayor in those major cities, how they, some of the issues that they're dealing with and how they're making sure that they can move forward, including, when it's the Supreme Court rulings and how they're adjusting to those things as well. So it was a great weekend. Like I say, I'm still recovering, but overall, it was a great, fun, action-packed weekend.
Well, I know that I promised that we'd get you on and off quickly so that you can get rested. I'm looking forward to doing this with you. And, I appreciate your time and your insight. Once again, today's guest is the author of the book Trap History and the executive editor of Atlanta Daily World, Mr. A.R. Shaw. And these and more stories can all be found at BINnews.com. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show was produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. And join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.